We've taken questions from the audience, both those in attendance and those who are listening from TV and radio, submitted questions through Facebook. Questions have been edited by Matt Crane, publisher of the Du Bois County Free Press, Richard Langdon, VUJC faculty, teaching political science and history. I will pose the question to each candidate, and each will be allowed 1.5 minutes to respond. We'll rotate the order of response, and at the end of the question period, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. I'll ask our candidates to come back out to stage, please. First question, and we will start with Mr. Horning. How do you feel about how veterans are being treated, with more and more returning from war with PTSD, other disorders and disabilities? They need proper assistance. What do you propose, Mr. Horning?
Well, one of my brothers was a chaplain, and a good part of what he did was just counseling people with divorce and losing their businesses and mental illness and all kinds of horrific things we're doing to our kids. But the bigger issue here is, what are they doing over there? You know, we have been declaring war. I mean, actually, let's put this back. We have not had a constitutional declaration of war since World War II. Nobody in Congress has taken their constitutional responsibility to either declare war or issue letters of marque and reprisal for things like terrorism. And since that has not happened, we have not stopped shooting at somebody. We paid the Northern Alliance to fight the Taliban. We paid the Taliban to fight the Northern Alliance. Our weapons are everywhere overseas, and we have become this, this armed monstrosity, and we're putting our kids in harm's way. And obviously, it's not working as advertised. We were told that this was going to do this, and this bombing was going to do that. It hasn't worked, has it? I mean, it just hasn't worked. World War II didn't last as long as we've been in Afghanistan. So I think the thing we should be doing to our veterans, first of all, is bring them home. Make them stop fighting for all of our little political issues. This is not defending America. It's not defending our freedom. What we're doing is we're making enemies all over the world. We've got our armies in over half the nations of the world, and those guns are pointed at the other half. What I would do is bring our kids home and then treat them right. We've made so many promises to them that we've pulled back, and I guess, it's always one of those big campaign things about, oh, do it for the veterans and stuff, but I want to stop getting them killed.
Mr. Spangler, how can we better treat our veterans?
Well, first of all, I believe that, again, if you look at Congress, the Veteran Committee is made up of mostly freshman congressmen. And you have to ask the question, why? That's one of the few committees that a congressman can serve on that he doesn't get any contributions to his campaign. That's why many of the favorite congressmen tried to get on different committees and not this very important committee. We need to support our veterans, and we need to have some of our elder congressmen on there to do more for them. We throw money. It seems like the VA budget has been increased, and then all of a sudden we just turn our backs and said, okay, here's the money, let's try to take care of it. I have a friend here in Huntingburg that he served in Vietnam, and the man, just for a hearing test, has to go all the way to Illinois. That's not right. Why can't our veterans go to their local hospital to get treatment, things like that, instead of a VA hospital?
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon, treatment of our veterans.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was in the Navy Reserve for almost 10 years, and my dad was in the Navy, so I've got a great deal of respect for our veterans. I'm also a health care provider, as you know. And ever since I ran for Congress, I felt like veterans should have a card in their pocket that says, I have health insurance, and they should be able to get access to health insurance where they choose. If that's in your local hospital or that's in your local VA clinic, so be it. But I think that's one of the big things that we have a problem with is access to health care. In Evansville, you have to go to Marion, Illinois for certain procedures and all the way to St. Louis for others. That's just not right. So what have I done since I've been in Congress? I've been promoting just that, to try to get veterans a card in their pocket that says they can go wherever they want. We're not doing enough by a long shot for our veterans. All the returning people we have now, we have a big instance of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also chronic head injury syndromes. And the fact of the matter is we don't have enough psychiatrists in the VA system to take care of them. So I offered a bill that would help us recruit more psychiatrists. I had a big input into the most recent VA passed bill that expanded coverage to the private sector, but we haven't done enough. So I think we're way behind. And again, I think a lot of this could be solved if we just give veterans a card in their pocket that says, you have health care, thank you, and you can go where you'd like to go.
Thank you. Start this one with Mr. Spangler. Where do you stand on same-sex marriage?
Well, where I stand is where the Bible stands. You know, when God created man, He created Adam, created a woman, Eve, and that is one of the greatest institutions of marriage, a man and a woman. The Bible tells me that homosexuality is wrong. I know what the definition of marriage is, and that is between a man and a woman. Simple as that.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon.
Well, based on my religious faith, I firmly believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That said, I think that, you know, what's going to happen is, unfortunately, is we're going to see this litigated in the courts. But I think, you know, I've felt for many years, and I haven't changed my opinion on this, based on the political winds, that, you know, based on my religious faith, I think it's one man, one woman.
Thank you. Mr. Horning.
Well, we're really not even talking about marriage. You know, what we're talking about is a contract that starts off with a license from the state, and then you get, you know, whether it's a minister or whether it's a justice of the peace or whether you go to Las Vegas, a little place where they do, you know, Elvis Presley stuff. All of these people can marry you, but it's a state contract. Now, you're not told the terms of the contract, and they can change after the marriage, but it is a social contract, whether we like to think so or not. So the church could have, at any point, taken this back and said, we're not having anything to do with this state institution, but they didn't. The churches have, you know, voluntarily, and it's partly because of the 501c3 status and that kind of thing, that they don't want to lose their special tax exemptions. But the problem here is we're not really talking about marriage at all. We're talking about something that our government has done to interpose itself between people when they just want to be able to will their property back and forth, or they want to visit somebody in a hospital. This has nothing to do with marriage or love. This is rights and responsibilities as assigned by our government, and our federal government should have nothing whatsoever to do with this.
Start this question with Dr. Bucshon. Costs of higher education has been quite an issue. The burdensome student debt has been in the news a great deal, affects many people, both public and private debt. Is there a role for federal government?
Well, here's the thing. I'm on the Education and Workforce Committee, and I have been since I've been in Congress, so we talk about this a lot. I think for the most part, education should be as close to the student as possible, whether that's elementary education, high school education, or college. So I think, you know, a lot of this does depend on what the states can do. I think the federal government can encourage institutions of higher education as well as states to try to get the costs down. But, you know, at the federal government level, it's going to be very difficult to really solve what is really a multifactorial problem. The cost of energy to run universities has gone up. The support across the country for state funding for institutes of higher education has gone down. Inflationary costs continue to go up. So, you know, the federal government can encourage the states and the institutions to act. And I think that's what's going to happen ultimately. I think what's going to happen is the American public is going to say, you should be able to go and get educated at a public institution and not go broke. I grew up in a small town in Kincaid, Illinois, population 1,400. My dad was a coal miner. I went to University of Illinois. Today, I'm not sure I could do it. That's just wrong. So I think it's a complicated problem. I'd like to see it addressed at the local and state level. If not, there are things the federal government can do to encourage that and improve it.
Mr. Horning, federal role in higher education?
Well, constitutionally, of course, it's unambiguous. The federal government should never have gotten involved at all. I mean, Article 8 of the Indiana Constitution actually does allow for state-sponsored education. And in fact, there's a mandate for common schools in the Indiana Constitution. Federal Constitution does not allow the federal government to take our money for any purpose related to education whatsoever. Anything that's not specifically granted in the Constitution is specifically denied. That's clarified by the 10th Amendment. So as far as the federal role in education, you can even see what it's done. Not only is it illegal, but it's been terribly counterproductive. You can just look at the curve of spending and cost in education since the federal government got involved in the 1980s. It's just been skyrocketing exponentially. And the quality of schools is actually flatlined, and so we've had a massive disconnect between cost and quality, and I think that could be very neatly addressed by getting government the heck out of it whenever we can.
Thank you. Mr. Spangler, federal role for higher education?
Well, I'm proud to say that my city and my county, they've got it right. You know, less than 100 yards from here is a beautiful manufacturing and tech center. You know, not every student that comes out of high school is a four-year college student. With Jasper and Du Bois County doing something like this, it allows students that are not four-year college students to get a better education, to get the training in different things such as welding and CNC, and which then allows them to get a higher paying job. So from that aspect, we've done it right on the local level. But I will say, and I agree with Andrew here, is the fact that the federal government has certainly demonstrated over and over again that they have totally messed up our education system. You know, teachers are no longer teaching. They're no longer challenging their students. They are teaching to test, and that's wrong. It's just not right. So let's get some teachers in Congress to make some of these rules. We don't need doctors and lawyers and bankers that don't understand education. We need teachers.
Thank you. Start this one with Mr. Horning. Coal is an important part of southern Indiana's economy, both mining it and consuming it. How do we balance the pollution problems with coal with the economic value of that coal and the meaning of coal in the livelihood of many people? Mr. Horning.
Well, of course, again, constitutionally, it's unambiguous. The government should never have been involved in this kind of policy because, as you can see, with even the beginning of the EPA under Nixon, a lot of it was largely to grant cover to people who were making terrible mistakes with our environment. And we've made it much more difficult for people like me, you know, just ordinary folks, to sue the government. Sue large corporations who are polluting or causing damage to our property. So we have kind of upset the legal order when it comes to means of addressing environmental issues. I'm not happy with the EPA's role in this because it's generally been, as with anything else in government, corrupt. So I have a big issue with the EPA coming in here and dictating what's going to happen with our coal, especially when this is something that's happening so fast. And we, as governments always pick winners and losers between oil and gas, and now it's we have Solyndra and solar and wind. We're always, these elections seem to be dividing along Democrat versus Republican, where Republicans favor this kind of energy sector, Democrats favor this kind of energy sector, and it doesn't make any sense as far as the environment or energy policy goes. It just happens to be one of those things that breaks people right down the middle, where the green, energy stuff is Democrat, and the old energy stuff is Republican because it's still cheaper. But the fact is we're not addressing one key issue here, and that all of the cheap energy has already been gotten. We've already got the cheap gas, we've got the cheap oil, and now we're having to work harder at it with fracking and using shale technologies. It's great technology, and we're doing well. Oh, I guess I'm over time.
Thank you. Mr. Spangler, coal as a resource and as a source of employment.
Okay, let's talk about some facts. Our district has all the coal mines. in Indiana. That accounts for 30,000 jobs. That's very important to our economy. Another fact, Indiana is rated 39th worst as far as air quality. 9% of our children have asthma. Autism is very, very high. So we have on one side, we have jobs, coal, a fossil fuel that God has given us. On the other side, we have concerns about the environment. We need to protect these jobs. My grandson is a coal miner. He works right here in southern Indiana. I don't want him to lose his job and come back and live with me. But on the other side of the coin, I want my grandchildren to have clean air. I want them to have clean water to drink. And we can have both. This fictitious thing that there's a war on coal is nothing but political. It's nothing but to throw fear into the people that work in the mines and thinking that they will lose their jobs because of the EPA. Yes, the EPA regulations are not right, and when I go to Congress, that's one of the things I will sit down and try to talk to the people there at the EPA and work things out.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon.
Well, my dad was a coal miner for 35 years, and so I understand the industry. And the reality is there is a war on coal. Indiana depends on fossil fuel. Every coal mine is in my district, and we burn coal more cleanly today than we ever have in the history of our country. The industry has done a tremendous amount to control emissions. What the Obama administration is doing through the EPA is ideologically driven. They've even said, the EPA director herself has said, what they're trying to do with CO2 regulation, for example, emissions, will have no effect, I repeat, no effect on the global temperature of the Earth. This is based on ideology against fossil fuel. If you want to talk to some people, talk to the people in eastern Kentucky, where 6,000 people approximately have lost their jobs because of an ideological position that will have no effect on our environment. All of us want clean air. All of us want clean water on both sides, no matter who we are. I have 4 kids. Of course, I want everyone to have clean air and clean water. But the facts speak for themselves. So this is ideologically driven. It is a war on coal. The manufacturing costs in our state, the energy costs in our state will go up dramatically if the EPA wins this. I'm in the fight, and I plan to win it.
Thank you. Start this round with Mr. Spangler. Genetically modified organisms, federal role in labeling of genetically modified organisms in products and patent rights for genetically modified organisms that may restrict their further use in farming.
Well, again, I'm a person of faith, and when you start working into areas of nature and man is trying to change things that God has put together for us, I would not, I do not support. I think that that God's infinite design for us is something that we need to follow, and that would be my position on that.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon.
Well, I think, first of all, the federal government does have a role through the USDA and others as far as labeling goes. I think it is appropriate for the American people to understand what is in the products. That said, you know, we've been genetically modifying products for years and years. We do it naturally. We plant 2 types of corn that will cross-pollinate. So we've been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of scare tactics going on out there now just because it's done in the laboratory. But again, that said, I do think it is appropriate for the federal government to say, give the American people the information and let them make a choice. But I think it's been massively overblown about the risk of genetically modifying our food products. We've been doing it for decades. And this has nothing to do with cloning. This is all to do with getting more products out of the land that we have when we have more and more people to feed. But again, we should label it. Let people know, let them make the choice.
Thank you. Mr. Horning, GMOs.
I think a bigger issue with this is really what our government has done. Well, actually, not just the government, but the people who are actually creating these GMOs, what they have done to secure special rights that are not available to other people. For instance, if a seed blows into my farm and I grow some of that corn and I don't, the property rights, the patent rights, the power that some of these corporations have been granted through campaign donations and elections, and the fact that this government of ours really is about special deals for special people. I think the big deal with GMOs is not really so much the GMOs themselves, because I agree that this is nothing new. We have different kinds of GMOs, and it's hard to draw a line and say this technology is scary and this one isn't. But the real issue with me is corruption, and what can be allowed through this process can be truly scary if we don't nip this in the bud and start regulating the regulators and start looking at how much money is being flowing through Congress right now, through campaign donations, through the whole process of lobbying, and what powers these people get as a result. That, to me, is a bigger issue.
Thank you. Mr. Spangler. Genetically modified organisms.
I think I started with that.
Oh, I'm reading the wrong line. Have we done all three of you?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's start with Mr. Horning. We mentioned during the GMO discussion patent issues. Let's expand the question about patent rights into software development, and some people feel it's gotten out of hand and that patents are being used as a weapon to restrict competition rather than to encourage innovation. And we will start this one with Mr. Horning.
That actually is a pretty sticky one, and I can't even give a constitutionally, unequivocal answer on it, because this does involve other nations as well. And because our industries have gotten complicated, where different things are developed in different parts. I mean, I work in an industry, in fact, that uses software all the time, and different components in software that might be developed in different countries. So between Israel and the United States and the Netherlands, we might have different patent issues. But I think if we're talking specifically about software, I think, one of those things that I'm finding very frustrating again is what's going on with, the NSA's role in not only the development of software and making sure that they've got their say in whatever happens in our software. And I don't know if this question was supposed to be designed at consumer software or medical software or what, but I do have serious issues with the way we have been managing the relationship between our government agencies and quasi-government agencies and corporations that are in fact forced in one way or another to cooperate with, for instance, the NSA. And that does hit software very directly. And it's not necessarily a patent issue. And I guess my answer to the question directly is that I will equivocate on what needs to be done with our patent laws, and I would do my best to ensure that people have freedom to innovate as well as security in their product. But my bigger concern is what the government is doing to those developers.
Mr. Spangler, patent issues and patents being used as weapons to restrict innovation rather than encourage it.
Well, I'm a small business guy, and I know that patents, there's a purpose for patents, and that is certainly to protect your product, or as we have here, we've been talking about software and so forth. And yes, it's done, it's done a very good job here in our country, but we also know that the Chinese has disregarded anything as far as patents, the things that we have. I mean, once we as a country innovate or invent something, it doesn't take too long for another foreign country like the Chinese to copy it. And so it can still work here, but when it comes to the world, it's going to be very, very difficult to impose.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon.
Well, since I've been in Congress, we've actually done patent reform to reform our system in our country to do a number of things. Number one, bring it up to the international standards that makes us competitive with the rest of the world. Number two, to make it more fair and accessible by getting rid of the backlogs. There's been a backlog of people trying to get patents, and by the time they get their patent through, someone else has already offered up another product very similar and then sues them and says that they developed it first. So we've changed that so that it's made it possible for people to be secure, but also give people opportunity and open up the ability for small and large businesses to offer and file for patents. The bigger issue I see, honestly, is just the people around the world ignoring U.S. patents, specifically the Chinese. And I think we have an issue with intellectual property theft that is a big one. How you solve that, I don't know, but I do think that we need to pay more attention to it. So again, the patent system needed to be reformed. We did that. It's more accessible and more fair, and I think we need to continue to work on the international situation.
Thank you. This question is about the condition of the country's infrastructure, highways specifically, and how improvements and maintenance should be funded. We will start this one with Mr. Spangler.
Okay, we certainly do need some change to our infrastructure. We do need to rebuild our roads. We do need to rebuild our ports. We need to get the internet into rural areas, because many areas, even here in southern Indiana, we just don't have good coverage. To fund that, we need to take the approach of possibly with like toll roads, let it be somewhat of a self-funding type direction. But that's something that can also elevate our economy from the standpoint that by rebuilding, by investing these dollars, we can rebuild our country and have better paying jobs. Better paying jobs mean a better family life.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon, maintaining and improving the infrastructure.
Well, I've been on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee for the last almost 4 years, and I had a big role in getting the last highway bill passed, which brought more money back to Indiana from our gas tax revenue than we've ever had. We're getting about 97 cents on the dollar versus 92 cents. But the reality is we're behind on infrastructure and we need more ways to pay for it. The problem is the federal trust fund, the Highway Trust Fund, is underfunded, primarily because of higher efficiency engines in cars and people buying less gasoline. Most people you may or may not know that the Highway Trust Fund is primarily funded through the federal gas tax, which is a fixed 18.4 cents a gallon, and it's been that way since 1993. So we're in discussions, with the administration and on the committee about how to find more funding for infrastructure, and I think we're going to have to take some novel approaches. I think tax reform, broad tax reform, that helps us bring back some of the U.S. corporate money that's sitting overseas, that's being used by them over there to expand overseas because of our non-competitive U.S. tax code. There's a big opportunity there to bring some of that money back and specifically direct it at infrastructure so it's used for the right thing. But we're going to have to look broadly at a lot of other things, I think, that are going to be on the table to fund infrastructure. We're definitely behind, but I think we can catch up. And I think the American people agree with that. I think both the administration and the Congress know that we need to solve this problem.
Thank you. Mr. Horning, infrastructure funding.
Well, isn't this a good example of where the proof is in the pudding? Where back in the 1950s, when a lot of the highway funding really started, we were told that this is going to make everything shiny and perfect and new all the time, and we're going to have lots of money to keep stuff going. But obviously, government doesn't work that way. And so the promises of constant upkeep and stuff just haven't been holding. And that highway funding bill has become it's kind of a joke in that that's this trundling juggernaut of corruption where people are using it to bring pet projects back home and so on. And because of that, the promises that were made originally have not been kept, but we've also thrown out a lot of other options where we've once again picked winners and losers. We've decided that automobile technology was going to win, which killed public transportation, which, not coincidentally meant that we started designing our cities around cars instead of people or trains or bicycles and so on. So you can make all kinds of arguments about whether, the government should be improving what they've been doing, but the history already says that whatever they promise isn't going to come out that way anyway. So it's not going to work, whatever we're going to do, and I just wish we would quit picking separating winners and losers entirely, and let the free market start taking back a more positive role, because that's exactly how we built railroads and public transportation, and a lot of roads are still built by free market people even today. And if we would just take a look and see how this could possibly happen, it's because if people want roads, they'll buy roads. We don't need government to do stuff we would do ourselves if we had the option. So we just need to give ourselves more options.
Start this one with Dr. Bucshon. How do we improve immigration policy?
Well, first of all, we need to quit talking with all the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, honestly, on both sides of the aisle. The reality is, the first step is we have to secure our borders of our country. And we also have to do better internal enforcement. 40% of the people that are here illegally came here legally. We don't have the infrastructure in place to find those people and make sure that they do what they said they were going to do. They came here legally. When their time's up, they should go back. So, you know, I'm optimistic on immigration policy, because I think the American people see that, and especially you're seeing it now with the children coming across this summer, that, you know, without first securing the border and getting the enforcement in place, everything else we do in immigration will not work. We have immigration laws we're not enforcing. We don't have enough border security at this point, especially on the southern border, but also along the Canadian border. And I think we need to address the legal immigration system. The agriculture industry is clamoring for reform of that system, as well as the high-tech industry is clamoring for reform there. But I think it's going to take both political parties to come together on behalf of the American people and find solutions that work.
Thank you. Mr. Horning, immigration policy.
Well, really what we're talking about is not even immigration policy, because we lure people in with jobs and we lure them in with free stuff, and we want them to vote in our elections, and we've got all kinds of reasons to be bringing people in here. You know, people come here because of several reasons. First of all, the countries that they're leaving have been torn up largely by our war on drugs. And so the fact that we have made their homeland a war zone means they want to get the heck out of there. They're looking for a better life. And God bless them for looking to America as that better life. We shouldn't be, however, making our labor laws so difficult that people have to use illegal labor to be competitive anymore. We've made it so hard for like a concrete contractor or somebody to find legal labor, when you could just get a busload of Mexicans from the Mexican consulate for a fraction of the cost and do away with a lot of the regulations to boot. Yes, they get caught. Yes, there's a cost to it, but we've made it so enticing to bring people into this country with our education system and with our healthcare system and with our jobs, that this is far more than an immigration issue. It's a government regulation, litigation, and taxation issue. And we have put way too much pressure on Americans, and we've made it way too enticing for people to take advantage of our largesse.
Mr. Spangler, immigration policy.
We need to secure our borders. That's certainly what we need to do, first of all. But we also know that when there's an 18-foot wall, there's going to be a 19-foot fence. We have to look at the reason why we have people that are coming across our borders. If they're illegal, they need to go back. I certainly support that. But you ever stop to ask a question, though? We have two borders. We have the northern border and we have the southern border. We have Canada. You never hear of any problems from our northern border. But we have problems with our southern border, with our southern neighbors and so forth. Why is that? It's economy. The Canadian economy is fine. It's much like ours. But with Mexico and the Central American countries, people are leaving because they don't have safety, they don't have food, they don't have a good standard of living. This is where we need to have some love for our neighbors. We need to help them from an economical standpoint, teach them how to build a better economy. That's how we can stop this immigration problem.
Thank you. Start this round with Mr. Horning. We are divided on Second Amendment issues versus regulation of firearms. Is there any middle ground?
Well, I wish more people actually read why we have the Second Amendment to begin with. And you're looking at a group of people that had to throw down their own government. I'm not going to soft pedal this. The Second Amendment is there to protect the Constitution against our own government. There's just no two ways about it. The people who gave us this amendment said so. This is not about hunting. This is not about anything other than equalizing what becomes a monopoly of power, where you can see it happening right now. We had no SWAT teams before 1976. Now everybody's got one. You know, the EPA gets one. You know, OSHA gets one. Everybody's got SWAT teams. Everybody gets armored personnel carriers and military equipment. And as our government is arming itself against us, by the way, we should be looking at exactly why it is we have two things. One is the right to keep and bear arms, which unequivocally is constitutional. Unequivocally, we shouldn't even be licensing weapons. You know, we've already gone way too far, allowing the government too much authority to categorize us, you know, put us in catalogs, give us, you know, all sorts of regulations based on all of this stuff. But more importantly, by voting for this system that is getting more heavily armed against us, when the rest of the world is passing us in liberty and economy. You know, you were mentioning the Canadians. Their economy is actually better than ours now. Their middle class has actually exceeded ours. And why? Because we are becoming this militant monster that's spending so much money overseas, unconstitutionally, of course, and building up these armed resources against citizens in the United States, which are in violation. Well, I guess I'm in violation of the time.
Thank you. Mr. Spangler, is there middle ground in gun regulation?
Well, let me say, I own a gun, and no one's going to take it away from me. That's my right. I believe that along with that right, there comes responsibility, and there also comes accountability. You know, it's been almost 2 years since Sandy Hook. A terrible, terrible situation there. We need to do some things as far as individuals here, as far as taking responsibility. You know, a lot of the gun violence we see comes from the mentally ill. You know, I had an opportunity during the campaign to talk to a number of different mothers that are mothers to mentally ill, grown mentally ill children. And they said to me, Tom, what can the government do about my grown child that has a gun? And I go to the police and I tell them that he could do harm to himself, or he's going to do harm to me, or he could do harm to somebody else. And the police will basically say, we can't do anything until he commits a crime. Those are the areas that we need to address. That's where the government needs to come in and address those areas as far as keeping the guns out of the hands of the people that should not have them.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon, middle ground on regulation of firearms?
Well, it's constitutional. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment as well as the rest of the constitutional rights that we have in our country. The reality is gun control doesn't work. Chicago has some of the toughest gun control laws in the country, and you see more violence there than most cities in America. And that's because people that are criminals have guns, and the people that are citizens that are abiding by the law don't. And so I think that, you know, some of the areas we need to address that can help, though, is the mental health issue is a big one. If you look at what's happening in our country, most of the violence as it relates to multiple shootings, people have mental health histories. What we've done in our country is we've really, to a certain extent, abandoned some of those people. I mean, when over 90% of the people who are homeless in our country have mental illness, I think we need to rethink our policy on how we treat those people. But I also do think that appropriate levels of training and teaching people how to appropriately use a weapon are important. So I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. You tell me something that works other than educating people and making sure that we don't have mentally ill people and criminals that are felons have access to weapons, and then I'll listen. But it's a constitutional right put in by our founding fathers.
Thank you. We'll start this round with Mr. Spangler, and it involves education policy at the federal level. We have tried No Child Left Behind. We have tried Race to the Top. Are we going to get to a point where the federal government comes up with some way to encourage public education without excessive interference in public education?
Well, certainly if we look at the track record of the federal government, we can see that that's not going to happen. federal government has made our education system a mess. Common Core, no child left behind. I mean, we have had doctors and lawyers, bankers that have tried to make decisions for educators, and they know nothing about what it is to teach a child. Children learn on different levels. We can't just throw the children in one area and expect that you take the test and you pass and you move on. You know, I was confronted about a couple years ago. My granddaughter, she took a very negative view of school. I had the opportunity. I decided rather than lose her in her middle school, I went back to school with her. And I caught her attention. I took a radical approach, and I caught her attention by saying, you know, school is important. And yeah, you may have had additional pressure from the standpoint of peer pressure, but school is important. She got the idea. So why I say that story is the fact that as parents, we need to take some more responsibility. We need to be there to help our children with the homework. And we need to help our teachers teach rather than teaching to test. And that's what we have today.
Thank you. Dr. Bucshon, encouraging public education.
Well, first of all, you know, the federal government currently is overreaching broadly on education. I said in my first segment that I believe education needs to be as close to the student as possible. I tell people all the time, I can't tell you who the best school teacher is in the 8th District of Indiana sitting in Washington, D.C. But I can tell you that the administrators in those schools can, and that's where the decision process needs to be. At the most, at the state level, where there is state input on the quality of schools in the individual states. What the federal government has tried to do under the current administration, and in fairness, under No Child Left Behind, which was put into law in 2002, is really a little bit of an overreach. The Department of Education has expanded, and now they're doing things like Reach to the Top. And what that is it's giving states waivers to No Child Left Behind and putting in the administration's policies on education. Again, taking that role away from the local communities and the individual states. We're a very diverse country, and depending on where you live in the country, the ways that you need to be educated could be different. One size fits all is not the answer. So we need to retract the federal role in education and get it back to the local communities and the states.
Mr. Horning.
Well, I should have said more clearly to begin with that I would end the Department of Education entirely, and it just shouldn't exist. So at the federal level, there should be no involvement in education whatsoever, and there's lots of reasons for that. But even at the local level, what we've done, you know, through centralization, and like the school consolidations, I was talking with somebody in the audience earlier about how a lot of small towns in Indiana died when they lost their local schools. And so I agree with you that we need to keep, you know, education more local. But there's a more insidious part to this too, that, you know, that we see what happens when you've got a North Korea kind of system, or the USSR, or Nazi Germany, or you go back thousands of years where you've got people who want to centralize education generally have an object in doing so that isn't what parents would want. And so I'm very encouraged to see things like homeschoolers and others who are taking responsibility for educating their kids. My wife did that, and you know, we're happy to see that kind of thing happen. But I'm also concerned at a time when our government has become much more secretive and much more powerful, and you know, obviously it's been caught lying to us many times already, that it really has no business having anything to do with the policy of in any way instructing our kids' minds when they're so young and prone to, you know, to suggestion. So I want to get government out for lots of reasons, not just constitutionally, but also morally and practically, because it's also just too danged expensive now.
Thank you. This will be the last question before closing statements. Involves the Agricultural Act of 2014 signed into law by President Obama. It included $8 billion in cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Do you believe that this should and can be reinstated, or should it take a different form? And we start this one with Dr. Bucshon.
Well, first of all, if you look at what happened with the Farm Bill, overall it's a good bill. It put certainty for farmers in our state and the district I represent, rather than extending the federal farm programs piecemeal. That said, you know, I do think the federal food program, supplemental nutrition program should be separate from the agricultural titles in the Farm Bill. The reality is that neither political party is going to be able to make that happen. So with that said, what do? Well, we know that there's a large amount of fraud and abuse in SNAP, in the food stamp program. And so what we did in the Farm Bill is not cut the food stamp program. We just tightened up the criteria that people have to comply with so that they're eligible for the program. And that resulted in an $8 billion savings to the federal government. But people that need food stamps still have access to food stamps. This is a necessary program. However, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of abuse, and we need to get a handle on that. So I think at the end of the day, my preference would be to separate that out from the Farm Bill, and I would support that. The reality is that what happens with the urban representatives and the representatives from the more rural areas feel that neither one of their programs would get past Congress without them together. I disagree with that, but that's the situation.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Horning.
Well, this is another example where government promises just don't hold true. And we were told a long time ago with the Great Society that, you know, there is going to be this shrinking of the lower class, and that the middle class was going to expand, and that everybody was going to be well fed. And there were a lot of promises made. And the same old promises were made in USSR and lots of other authoritarian countries that they're selling you big government on the promise of charity through the means of politics. That has never worked as advertised. And what we have done by making this involuntary collection plate of the IRS, pay for everything, is we've killed off all of the alternatives that used to exist, like church charity programs that still exist, but they're struggling. And a lot of Kiwanis, Rotary clubs, these service clubs and co-ops that used to exist to serve these needs have largely disappeared. And in fact, their role has almost entirely disappeared because everybody really did give it the office. And so while we know there's all kinds of corruption in these programs, not just from the bottom up, but also from the top down, what we really should be doing is try to establish a vision for this country. Do we believe in liberty or not? Do we believe that people will serve each other in communities like they used to, or not? Are we going to keep delegating everything to our government? And I guess this is sort of a long way of saying, I'd get rid of all this stuff entirely. The government has no constitutional authority in this to begin with. It has no role in this that's working. And you can see that by our shrinking middle class and by the fact that we have more poor people, not just here in America, but compared to other nations that we used to pass by just hand over head, we're screwing up, and we need to stop this.
Thank you. Mr. Spangler.
I was saddened. I was saddened that that the SNAP program was reduced. It's children benefit from that, and the fact that that was a political issue, and again, Congress used that as a political issue in regards to the Farm Bill, getting the Farm Bill passed, and that was the only way was to reduce it. When I can stand up here and say that I want to, I'm pro-life and I want to protect the unborn while in the womb, then I also need to stand up here and say that I want to take care of that child that needs help. Maybe they're from a low-income family. Maybe it's a one-parent family. So I need to stand with those children in those families. So I don't believe that it was a good decision that the SNAP program was reduced. I would like to see it raised, but I also, as pointed out by our congressman, is that he identified that there's fraud, there's problems with the program. Well, then let's quit talking about it and let's do something about it. Let's change some of these programs. Instead of keep talking about how bad the program is and make the American people hurt because our inaction or our insensitivity to the poor and the middle class.
Thank you. Well, now I will ask each candidate to present a 2-minute closing statement, and we're starting with Mr. Spangler.
Well, let me just say that I'm not a politician. I think I've said that before. This is the first time I've ever run for public office. And I'm running for the right reasons. I believe that there are greater days ahead for America, and I believe that we need to make some changes in government. You know, you have three candidates up here, and we're all different. You have the status quo, and if the electorate feels as they do many times, I believe it's 92% of the time the incumbent returns, well then that's what as an electorate you've got to expect then. That's what you get. But on the other side of the coin, I believe that I can bring some change. I can bring some change through transparency. And I can let you, as the voters here in the 8th District, know what's going on, whatever the good or the bad or the ugly may be. And you'll understand it. It will not be in Washingtonese. My desire is to build a staff that is diverse, that is coming from this district. I'm not going to go to Washington like many congressmen do and hire Washington insiders to be part of their staff. I'm going to have people from the 8th District go with me to keep me right, and I won't change like many congressmen do. They change, they go, and they forget you. I want people to answer my phones that when they say that they're calling from Dale, Indiana, they know where Dale, Indiana is. I want to be your congressman, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spangler. Dr. Bucshon.
Well, I ran for Congress in 2010, never having run for any political office at any level, because like I said in the previous part of this discussion, I felt like regular people in regular jobs should be running for Congress. The Founding Fathers wanted people to step outside their comfort zone and serve. So the reason I'm in Congress is for the right reason, because I want to serve the people of the 8th District. I didn't need a job before I ran for Congress. In fact, I gave up a career in cardiovascular surgery to do this, to represent you, and to be the strongest advocate on your behalf that I can be. And I've been effective. Congress has not, but I have. I've had a great deal of impact on the Transportation Committee as it relates to our highways and roads, as I mentioned earlier. I've had some impact in the Education and Workforce Committee, pushing back at the National Labor Relations Board when they overstep their bounds, trying to get the cost of education down. I've had a dramatic effect on health care. A lot of things you don't see behind the scenes. People come to people like me in Congress and talk to them, how is this going to affect the patients? Because that's the key, right? How is it going to affect the individuals and the patients, not how it's going to affect the system. So I've had a great deal of impact in that area. And also energy. The EPA right now is going to cause the energy costs in this state to go dramatically up if we don't win this battle. And it is a battle ideologically based. Again, there's no evidence that what they're trying to do will have any effect on the global temperature at all. The only thing it's going to do is damage Indiana's economy. So I've been effective in pushing back at the regulating agencies in the Obama administration. I'm running for the same reasons. I still think that we need people that have not been career politicians to be in office, and I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Horning.
Well, I guess, it's not usually popular to say I want to be a politician. I guess we have two people saying they don't want to be politicians. I want to be a politician, and I want to make that term mean something nice. It should be the noble art of getting along. It should be, where we go to Washington, D.C. in order to, not make things easier for people, but to really limit the sort of damage that we tend to do to each other and do nothing else. What government is supposed to do is have a very light hand in our lives. Federal government is supposed to be essentially invisible. If you actually read the Constitution, and I've got annotated copies of both Indiana and U.S. Constitutions on my website at horningforcongress.com. If you read those and see where I'm highlighting where I think we went wrong, you'll see that, we can talk all we want about the little issues like, what we've been discussing here mostly tonight are symptoms of an ungoverned government. Our government is out of control. It's busted its boundaries. We have not stopped fighting each other, and not just other nations, but we've been dividing ourselves against ourselves. There's a poll out recently that talks about how Americans are even more than race becoming divided along political party, where now you have very few people who even marry across Democrat and Republican lines because it's turning into such a hot button issue where the Democrats tell you if the Republicans get in office, all these horrible things are going to cut it out. We need to stop all of this fear-mongering. We need to stop all of this faith in politics. And I got to tell you, I'm here not because I think I'm going to do something special in Congress, but because I'm hoping that you are going to do something special with your vote. I'm hoping you're going to tell everybody who's looking in Washington, D.C. and everywhere else around the world that you've had it. I see all these signs, oh, had enough, vote Republican, had enough, vote Democrat, had enough, vote Republican, had enough. No, if you've had it, don't vote Democrat or Republican at all. If you don't like me, and there's plenty of reasons not to, I suppose. Don't ask my wife about this later. But if you don't like me, write in a vote. Do anything but vote the same way you have been voting. Obviously, I'm not the status quo guy. If you like what you have, don't vote for me. But if you want anything else, I'm it.
Now you may thank our candidates. This concludes the 2014 Congressional District 8 Election Forum in Jasper. I want to thank our sponsors, the Jasper Community Arts Commission, the City of Jasper, and Vincennes University, as well as our broadcast partners on the planning team, DC Broadcasting and WITZ Radio. This was a result of a collaborative planning team representing all area news media, Vincennes University, and the Jasper Arts Center. We hope the area residents have found this helpful in deciding how to vote. Remember, the election is November 4th. Thank you, and good night.